welcome in everybody. We're just gonna let some folks trickle in and we will get started in a few minutes. The folks that just joined, we are just letting folks trickle in, and we will get started in just a few minutes here. Thanks so much for coming this evening. And we'll just wait about another minute, give folks some additional time to hop in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to everyone for coming this evening to our advocacy workshop, Transforming Transportation in Colorado. And before we dive in, I would just like to pass it to our wonderful translator for this evening, Indira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Indira Guzman, and I am here with the Community Language Co-op. And this evening, the organizers of this event have made a commitment to language justice. What that means is that we want everyone to participate in and engage in the language of their heart. So in a second, we're going to turn on interpretation. You will see an icon on the bottom of the screen that says interpretation. Make sure you select the language that you prefer to engage in. I will be interpreting into English and Spanish. I am now going to repeat this for our Spanish-speaking friends. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Indira Guzmán y estoy aquí con la Community Language Co-op. Esta tarde los organizadores de este evento han hecho un compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje. Lo que esto significa es que queremos que todos participen en el idioma de su corazón o en el idioma en el que se sientan más cómodos. Para esto vamos a usar la interpretación simultánea. En un segundo vamos a aprender la interpretación y usted va a ver un icono en la parte posterior de su pantalla que dice interpretación. Asegúrese de hacer clic allí y seleccione el idioma en el que prefiere participar. Voy a estar interpretando de inglés a español o español a inglés. Si usted trae un celular o una tablet, busque los 3 puntitos o la opción de más y ahí va a encontrar los ajustes de interpretación. Si tiene una pregunta, por favor, mándenme un chat. Let's go ahead and turn on interpretation. If you want to click interpretation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Indira. And again, thanks to everyone for coming this evening. So we're super excited to host this event. This event is a collaborative effort across a wide number of organizations, and we're so happy to have you here. The purpose of this event this evening is to empower members of the public to confidently express their vision for what our transportation systems in Colorado should look like, and to express that vision within the transportation rulemaking that is currently happening at the state level. So from 6 to 7:30 this evening, in about an hour and a half, we have a pretty packed full agenda that we're super excited about. So we have a variety of perspectives from a breadth of speakers from across the state about why this rulemaking is so important for us and our future in Colorado. We will engage in a fun sort of transportation visioning, brainstorming exercise. And then we'll walk through some of the easiest, highest impact actions that you as a member of the public can take to influence this rulemaking that the Transportation Commission is undertaking in a positive direction. And with that, I will pass it over to Jenny Gang from Conservation Colorado to walk us through a brainstorming exercise.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. As he said, my name is Jenny Gang, and I work for Conservation Colorado as the transportation advocate. So what that means is that I work at the state level, at our state legislature, and in regulatory spaces like the Transportation Commission, which we're talking about here tonight, to develop and pass transportation policy that's centered in both climate action and in environmental justice. So some of the issues that I talk about every day are public transit, electrification, and most recently, transportation planning, which is what we're going to talk about here tonight. One of my favorite parts about being a transportation advocate is when I do get to talk to community members, because everybody has a transportation story. And what I mean by that is simply that we all get from one place to another, or maybe we don't. And that's the story. The means of transportation that all of us can access define almost everything about our lives. You know, it's how often we get to go travel places that make us happy. It impacts where we can live and what kind of jobs we have. And it deeply impacts our relationships with one another, how often we get to see our friends and our family. A really, really impactful story that I heard recently. Last week, my friend told me about someone he knows, a mother who's working very hard to get custody of her child, but she keeps missing visitations because she can't afford the bus fare, or the bus doesn't come when it's supposed to. And you know, these transportation systems can even impact our freedom. Recently, RTD cut the bus line to the Adams County Courthouse. So people who need to make a court date and who aren't able to drive could miss it if they can't find a ride. So that is, yeah, that's the importance of the work that we do. And what I like about my job is that I get to collect your transportation stories and translate them into policy. So we're going to start off tonight's event with an interactive exercise using something called Google Jamboards. You do not need any software for it. All you need is to be able to access the internet. So you can do it on your phone, you can do it on a computer. And if you are unable to participate on the Jamboard for whatever reason, feel free to just answer my questions in the chat. And Jamboards is totally anonymous. It won't record who says what. So first I'm going to share my screen to show you how it works. So this is the Jamboard, and we are all going to be looking at the same Jamboard, and we're going to be making marks on it, and we're going to be writing things on it, and it's all going to be appearing on here. So I'll just show you really quickly how to do the marks and the writing. This right here is the pen and marker selection. So you can select a marker. That's what I'm going to do, and select the color red. And with that, I can color all over the Jamboard if I want to. And if I see that I've made a mistake, like this big blob, I can click undo. And then the other feature we're going to be using is the sticky note. So once again, it's this one right here. Click on the sticky note, and I can write whatever I want. and click save. And then it'll be right there on that. And again, I will get rid of that for now. Okay, so I am going to copy and paste the link to this Jamboard into our chat. And it's going to go to everyone. So go ahead, go into the chat, click on the link, and it will bring up the Jamboard. I'm going to give it a second. I can see you all are joining. Thank you so much. All right. So first off, I'm going to start with a pretty simple question. I think we all kind of miss the in-person events that we used to have, but one of the most wonderful things about having Zoom events is we get to talk to people from all over the state of Colorado, maybe even elsewhere, who knows. So the first thing I'm just going to ask you to do is take that marker or pen function and do a line or a dot or a circle to show us where you're coming from tonight. So I'm going to circle Denver because I am here in North Denver in my home. Awesome. I see we've got Boulder, Fort Collins, Durango. Oh, somebody's near Telluride. I'm jealous. Colorado Springs, Pueblo. And don't worry, it doesn't have to look pretty. That's not the purpose of a Jamboard. Right. I'll give it another minute or two. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of our slides on this Jamboard. If you look up at the top where it says Transportation Visions Citizen Advocacy Workshop, there's a way that you can move from one slide to the next. So you see we're on 1 out of 7, and you can take your time on slide 1 if you want. But I'm going to go ahead and navigate to slide 2, where I have my second question for you all. So it's going to be the same thing. I'm just going to ask you to take a pen or marker and circle your answer. And this time the question is, thinking about the place that you go most often, whether that's work or school or somebody's home, how do you get there? How do you get there most days? Some people might have 2 answers. Some people might have answers that aren't exactly on here, like you take an Uber or you're in a van pool. So just, pick the closest thing. All right, lots of bicycles here. That's pretty cool. Walking, cars. Not seeing a ton of public transit. There we go. I actually love this. I think it's super pretty. Now it looks like rainbow birds' nests. Awesome. Thank you all. So now, again, you can take your time on this one, but we're going to move on to the next slide. Same pictures, same answers, but this time the question is, in your perfect world, how do you wish you could go where you need to go every day? Awesome. Still seeing some bikes, buses and trains. Not a ton of love for the car here. We like to see that. We like to see that people love their options. All right, yeah, and as Jan is saying in the chat, if for some reason this isn't working for you, please put your answers in the chat if you want. All right, awesome, thank you all for participating. So we're gonna go on to the next slide, slide 4, and this is where you all get to complain. So we're gonna use the sticky notes this time, and that's this little one right here. And our question is, what frustrates you about transportation where you live? So I'm going to make a sticky note. I'm going to write, bus never comes when it's supposed to. I actually experienced this the other day. My bike got a flat when I was biking home from work, And I was like, oh, it's okay. I'm on MLK. It's the biggest street between downtown and North Denver. Surely the bus will come soon. And I started walking, and I walked the whole like 1.5 miles home, and the bus never came. All right. Ooh, we're seeing a lot of good things. GHG, absolutely. Too many cars, pathetic bicycle facilities, not dense enough to be walkable. Huge problem here in Colorado. Dangerous, traffic, expensive. Trouble breathing, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I hear a lot of people say that they would want to ride their bike if the air wasn't so awful. And I do want to let everyone know that you will have the whole presentation and longer if you want to be working on these Jamboards. So we can totally come back to them. There's also another, oh, hold on. Yeah, so you can come back to this. You can work on it during our speakers or later on in the event. But for now, let's go on to the next question. And this is where I want to hear your dreams and your visions for Colorado's transportation future. So this question is, what transportation projects do you want for your community? If you could have a wish or a magic wand and make one thing happen right away, what would it be? Dedicated bus lanes, awesome. Walk everywhere. I wish that too. A blue Post-it note, I wish that too. Flatiron Flyer should be free, yes. Awesome. You all are doing great. So like I said, we're going to come back to this Jamboard. I'm going to remind you after all of our speakers speak that this is still here, and we still have a couple more pages that you can fill in if you want. And I'm hoping that maybe some of our speakers will spark some excellent ideas. All right. So thank you all so much for participating in that. That went really well. So I'm pretty happy about that. And I am now going to introduce my esteemed colleague, Danny Katz, to talk about why exactly we're gathered here over transportation planning tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Katz. I'm the director of COPIRG. My dog's been lying here very quietly, so now he's going to start barking in 30 seconds. So just be ready for that. Let me share my screen and we'll dive in. So if you're not familiar, COPIRG is a statewide nonprofit advocacy group, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group. We are advocating for a safer and healthier Colorado, where we're all freer to pursue our own individual well-being and the greater public good. We do a lot of work on transportation issues, and we're thankful for all the support of the folks out there who are listening in today. So honored to be here, and thanks for tuning in, and thanks for getting involved. I'm hoping that my presentation will help clarify what this rulemaking is and the potential outcomes. And then we'll have some other folks who come right after me dig in a little bit deeper on some of the key pieces. So this is a rulemaking for transportation around greenhouse gas. Here's what I want. So I want a transportation system that has all these things. One of the things I want is relatively fancy. It's sidewalks. It's, wait a minute, did I say fancy? No, I meant most basic piece of our transportation system. That's what I meant, most basic piece of our transportation system. That's right. So sidewalks, I would love to have sidewalks everywhere. Everyone is a pedestrian at some point during the day. That's critical to be able to get around safely, whether you're walking, rolling, whether you have a stroller, carrying groceries, whatever it may be. I want safe biking infrastructure. I want public transit. So this is, I think, a vision for how I'm approaching this rulemaking is just kind of what's the world I want to live in? What's the transportation system I want? But there was one thing I couldn't quite figure out how to have a photo of, so I'm just going to write it out. I want lots of buses, like every 10 minutes a bus comes, it's on time, it's reliable, it gets me to where I want to go, it's affordable, it's safe. I didn't really have a picture of that. Like most of the time you don't have buses back to back to back to back like you do have cars. So I want lots of buses, lots of buses. That's a key piece of the transportation system that I see. Why all this matters? When it comes to transit, walking, rolling, biking, these are all critical solutions. We're here because there's a rulemaking that's going to be looking at the greenhouse gas impacts of those and potentially incentivizing and rewarding and building out the kind of system that I'm looking for. The first bullet point here comes from our state goals. We need to cut greenhouse gas pollution from transportation by 40% by 2030. But I want to emphasize that while this rulemaking is a greenhouse gas reduction and pollution rulemaking, there are so many other benefits that come if we can tackle the greenhouse gas emissions with these different strategies and solutions: walking, biking, rolling, transit. There's so many other benefits we get. We reduce our local air pollution. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the ozone alerts that we've been getting. Up and down the Front Range from Denver to Fort Collins, we are in unhealthy levels of air when it comes to ozone. Other parts of the state are also either falling into those categories or will soon. This is about safety. This is about reducing the number of fatalities that we have on our roads, the Vision Zero goal, 0 deaths on our roads. It's about more accessibility, more options for people. It's about reducing transportation costs. If we solve our greenhouse gas emissions with these strategies, improve mental and physical health, community and neighborhoods, connecting people to more jobs, housing, and services. So for me, this is a critical strategy. This oftentimes referred to as multimodal, this walking, biking, transit. This is a critical strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not only because it can tackle climate change, but we can see some other really big benefits. It's also important to highlight, though, that this transportation pollution and the climate change that we're tackling right now has a disproportionate impact on low-income communities, on people of color. One of the largest contributors of ozone is our transportation system, and that is a local pollutant, and that can settle in areas where we see those highways. We have a long history of highway expansions that run through these different communities, and there's an increased pollution and health impact. We have an example there. Lower income households spend a lot more on their transportation compared to the average. And if you can't afford a car, then you really are in trouble because you have very limited options, and that limits your ability to live your life, to achieve the dreams that you have. So this is a big problem. The image on the right shows the asthma rates just in Denver. And again, it aligns with where those highways are and the disproportionate impacts that it has. All right, so let's talk transportation and climate pollution, because that's really what this rule is first and foremost working to address. So this graph shows the greenhouse gas emission reductions that we need to get by 2030. And the different colors indicate taking into account calculations around some of the policies we've already started to implement or that we anticipate implementing. Feel free to read those lines, but the most important thing is to look at the blue. The blue is really how much more we have left, even if you went big on electric vehicles. I oftentimes hear electric vehicles, critical solution for tackling climate change in the transportation sector, and I agree, but we're not going to get to where we need to go just with electric vehicles. And I think this rulemaking is so critical because it can really get at that blue part of the pie. I'm not saying the other colors are guaranteed, locked in, no problem, we got it. But there are estimates, visions, theories of how we get there using mostly an electric vehicle strategy for those other colors. But that blue part it's going to be really important to think about this from the multimodal perspective, and including land use, which I'll talk about in a second as well. So I just want to put this in perspective. We are making progress to cleaning up our transportation system. We have a big chunk in that blue that we need to tackle. And I think this rulemaking should really dig in on that, and offer up those multimodal solutions for all the benefits that I talked about before. I also want to remind people, we have a lot of money. Not enough for the things that I want to do, but we do invest a lot of money. A recent bill that passed in the legislature, we're looking at upwards of over $5 billion. There's allocations for electric vehicles, there's allocations for multimodal and other air pollution reductions, and there's billions that are going to go to CDOT and local governments. But then there's also just billions more that we already had before this bill passed. There's more money that could come from federal stimulus and infrastructure bills. So I just want to emphasize, we have a lot of money, but oftentimes that money gets invested in some of the things that I show on the right there. So some of those big highway projects. And the more that we wind up investing these dollars, and even though it is a lot of money, it's still limited. The more that we're putting dollars into those projects, the less we have for some of the things that I want to see that I think will tackle climate change. And the more that we put money in those sort of projects, it oftentimes will make the problem worse. It will actually increase the amount of pollution we have. So we fundamentally need to make sure this rulemaking is taking us away from a lot of the projects that we have spent money on in the past and invested in a new transportation system. I like that this panel was called Transforming Transportation. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here with this rule. There's a lot of text here. You don't have to read it all, but I just want to make sure people understand. I think there are actually two big steps with this rulemaking. The first is happening between now and November 18th. November 18th is a big vote at the Transportation Commission, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking to you about today and over the next couple of months. That's a big decision point, but it's only the first of two big steps. By November 18th, we're going to basically set the rules for how to make transportation decisions moving forward using greenhouse gas emissions as a key decision point. So you can see the kinds of decisions or pieces of the rule that will go in there. We'll be creating a goal, we'll be improving the modeling, we could be generating a menu of mitigation opportunities, and we could be developing a much better process that actually includes a lot more voices in a much more accessible and equitable way. So there's a lot on the table, and this is important because, like anything, how you reward things, the rules are really critical. They really dictate everything else. I mean, I'm a big sports fan, so if in basketball we don't award 3 points to people who shoot from farther away, less people would shoot from farther away. I mean, the rules dictate what you do. And so these rules are going to be really important. And that's really what we're setting into motion between now and November 18th. I have another slide that digs into some of the things we're looking for there. But I want to emphasize it's really only step one, because no matter what kind of rules we set, we still have to make the decisions and still use those rules to decide what we're funding and building. So between November of 2021, this November, and next October, we basically have a year to then ensure that that money and those decisions are being implemented the right way to identify the projects we're going to fund in the next couple of years, to create that 10-year plan that then determines what we fund when we get more money, and really just approve and build and launch and operate the things that we want to see. So it's really two big steps. We're here today talking about this first one, developing the rules that are going to guide all this, which is going to be critically important. For those of you who want to know some of the dates, this is the timeline. August 13th, the draft rule will come out. There will be a 60-day public comment period. So between August 13th and October 12th, people should get their public comments in. There will be some hearings, likely one on September 14th, likely some others around the state. We don't have details on that yet. And then the decision again at CDOT and the Transportation Commission on November 18th. This graph is online and we can send you the link. So I just want to go back again and emphasize some of the solutions I'm really looking forward for here. I want this rule and this process to result in better transit. This is an image that I want to thank the Transit Center for putting together, increasing transit service here in the Denver area, just increasing it on existing lines. A 40% increase helps somebody, and in this particular example, it's someone from Westwood, helps someone access 4 times more jobs within a 30-minute transit commute. So again, this is This is really about opportunities. It has huge impacts if the rules we set can help leverage and lead towards more transit service. But it can also impact how we build and what we build. So from a land use perspective, the graph on the left here is just highlighting that the more we have cluster development or people who are living closer together, the fewer trips you have to take, the shorter trips you can take. Being able to actually walk to a grocery store or walk to a bank or whatever the activities are that you do in a day, that's really critical versus a sprawling development. You're tacking on miles and miles of driving. So what we build has a huge impact too, and the use of land, how we do that. And then of course, what we build, the image on the right shows as we widen highways, we increase driving, we induce driving. If that's how we spend our money, then that's how people are going to travel around, and that's going to bring that additional pollution. So we're really hoping that this rulemaking has impacts there as well. So the final slide, some of the things that we are looking at, and when I say we, this is a broad coalition representing a number of different organizations who have worked to develop a checklist, something that we can look at and go, is the rule resulting in these things? So will it result in more multimodal options, transit service, bike and ped infrastructure, and fewer highway expansion projects? We can't do both and hit our climate goals. We can't expand highways and add to transit, partly because we just don't have the money. We have to make those hard decisions, and partly because we know those highway projects will actually induce more driving and dig the hole deeper. Do we have goals that are headed and putting us on path to the 1261 climate targets, which are our state goals? Does this improve outcomes for disproportionately impacted communities? So as we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, are we also reducing the negative impacts that particular communities have had to live with more so than others? Modeling is an important one. Some of you out there might be in the business, and so anything you can do to help us ensure that there's more accurate modeling so that when we are judging a project, we're judging it for what it's actually going to do. A highway project will result in more driving. Transit, we're looking to have reduce that. And then there is going to be some critical questions around enforcement and evaluation. We have to make sure that as we're spending dollars and investing dollars, we're looking at those impacts so we can be improving our decisions and not locking ourselves into 10 more years of the same decisions without actually understanding, oh, this project really bent the climate curve down. Oh, this one didn't. So that's going to be really critical as well. And on that note, thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over now to Daya with Mile High Connects, and we'll be around for questions later if you have any questions about what I said. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Danny. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Deyanira Zavala, and I'm the Executive Director of Mile High Connects. And you may be wondering, why am I here? I just want to tell a really brief story before jumping into my presentation. I moved to Colorado about 10 years or so ago from Texas. And so I know a little thing about sprawl, and sprawl is not a very great thing. My family, we're low income and still are. My parents still rely on tote the note cars, paying cash really for cars that aren't going to last longer than about a year. And so this is, when I talk about transportation and when I talk about affordable housing, this is something that's very close to my heart because it's something that I personally experienced growing up, and really lifting up the stories of communities that don't have dignity when it comes to bus stops and bus access. And really that's all we're asking for, which is why I think it's so important that we're having this conversation today. So I'm going to talk a little bit just in terms of context around why is transportation so fundamentally connected to housing. And so I think folks in the Denver metro area know this all too well. It has become increasingly unaffordable to live here. A one bedroom is roughly about $1,600. That's probably actually higher. Colorado Springs, a one bedroom is about $1,300. Pitkin County, if you're looking to rent a 3-bedroom house, it's about $2,500, if not more. So at the end of the day, it's just unaffordable, and we have very limited places to go when it comes to building affordable housing. The other thing I want to point out is that because our affordable housing is really crunched, we have about 470,000 folks in the state of Colorado that are doubling up And so what does this mean? This means that these are homes, these are families that are living with multiple generations in one home for a variety of different reasons. But what we suspect is that it's often because it's just unaffordable for someone to, rent a 1-bedroom apartment or rent a 2-bedroom apartment just to have a little bit more space. The other thing I'm just going to point out is really around what's known as location efficient neighborhoods. And so this is from CNT based out of Chicago, and about 7%, at least in the Denver metro area, 7% of neighborhoods are location efficient. So what does that mean? Smarter, more sustainable way of looking at how communities are built, looking at density, looking at vibrancy, everything that Danny mentioned around having walkable streets, access to public transportation, and really having access to those necessities that you need to just live your daily life. So why is Mile High Connects in this conversation? Because we really center on the effects of displacement and gentrification in communities. We know that at the end of the day, displacement happens for a variety of reasons. It could include anything from age, gender, climate, storms, fires, as we're seeing now across the country, but certainly in our state. And just disinvestment in neighborhoods really contributes to gentrification and displacement pressures on communities. This is from a report that the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge, also known as SPARK, completed late last year on climate change and displacement effects, really looking at what does that pressure look like in the Denver metro area. And then also looking at social vulnerability. So what does this mean? At the end of the day, how much of a family's whole paycheck is going towards housing and transportation? And in the Denver metro area, we really see that crunch. But I would also say certainly across the state, for those that are most vulnerable, we're seeing our paychecks literally dwindling in front of our eyes. So Danny talked a little bit about land use and why is this, how does this all connect? So for us, land use and land use regulation really goes to, sorry, there's my dog, zoning, affordable housing laws, permitting fees, and then facility requirements. So basically how complicated are cities making it for community organizations to build affordable housing, to really meet the community needs and where they're at? And when we say this, we're really also looking at transportation, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to build a house out in the middle of nowhere, but if no one has an affordable way to get to and from their home, to and from work, it doesn't really meet our outcomes. So Mile High Connects is really focused on building a racially equitable and resilient Denver metro region where community solutions are at the center of systems change. So we're really working to prioritize and increase equitable investment in community solutions and lifting up that you can no longer have these siloed conversations around affordable housing and land use and transportation. It needs to be one and the same, and that these conversations are necessary because we as people do not experience them in silos. So when we talk about affordable housing, land use, and transit, and especially this rulemaking, one thing that's really important for us to lift up are what are the opportunities to build more equitable communities across the state. So what you see on the screen, I think, are three priority areas that we are certainly advocating for as Mile High Connects. Really prioritizing policy and regulatory recommendations based on equity. So how is this going to affect communities that have been disproportionately impacted by climate, historically underinvested in, yet they are high resilient with low wealth? Let's make sure that communities are the first to receive the benefits and not the ones that are displaced as a result of any changes. The second, as Danny mentioned, we also dream of fast, reliable, affordable transportation. At the end of the day, we need to encourage folks to get out of their cars and into the bus or into public transit and see that there's different options that are available. But if we don't invest in public transit, it's kind of a moot point. We really need to make sure that our bus systems are actually focused on how community travels and lifting up exactly what Danny mentioned, the opportunities that people will have as a result of a better system. And then the third piece is really around equitable transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development, or TOD, has been in existence for decades now. However, equitable transit-oriented development really centers how communities actually use the transportation system and what their needs are. We also want to consider TOD, not just around light rail stations, which I think is historically how we've looked at it in the Denver metro area, at least, but really start to look at bus stations, those future bus rapid transit, and really start to look at what new regulatory policies might exist from a city level to make sure that we're building affordable housing near transit stops. So I mentioned reforming land use and how this all connects to greenhouse gases is because the more density that we add, the better it ultimately is for communities. The project that you see on your screen is the Accessory Dwelling Unit or Single Family Home Plus project from West Denver Renaissance Collaborative. This is a fantastic coalition in the west side of Denver that's really looking at how do we build soft density for folks that already own their home and they don't want to displace others in their neighborhood. And so by using zoning that really allows for increasing housing and wealth creation, we also build density in a way that allows us to have those truly walkable neighborhoods that a lot of us desire. This, which is a little bit blurry, is an example of equitable transit-oriented development. The Evans Lofts, which was a project of one of our partners, Urban Land Conservancy, really came at a time when affordability was still something that was attainable. Again, thinking about what are the unique ways that equitable transit-oriented development could look like in other cities is something that really needs to be explored, especially in our suburban and outer range communities where density may not currently exist. Last thing I'm going to share is really around the Etod principles. And so what are we talking about? What are we really aspiring to? If we really want to make a dent when it comes to our climate impacts, we need to look at all forms of mobility and how people want to use. Because at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is build a better tomorrow. We're trying to build a better city where folks have access to good transportation, good land use policies, affordable, accessible housing options, and really services that meet the needs of everyone within that community. At the end of the day, if we don't necessarily look after the land, it will destroy us. So we need to take a step back and really make sure that the policies and the opportunities that we have before us, this once in a lifetime generation, is not for naught. It needs to make sure that we actually serve the communities that need our help and have always needed our help. That's going to be it for me. I've got my contact information on the screen. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Eric Herbst.
Yeah, thank you, Dea. It's a great presentation. Give me 1 second here. There we go. Can everybody see that? So yeah, I'm Eric Herbst. I'm with the Northeast Transportation Connections, or NETC for short. We are a transportation management association. And so I kind of wanted to, when I was thinking about this presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of background, and maybe people have heard about TMAs, the Transportation Management Associations, but maybe some of you have heard of them, but maybe you're not exactly sure what a TMA is. So we are basically one of 8 of these TMAs in the Denver kind of Front Range region. We are all about reducing congestion, improving air quality. We're kind of a partnership with these. There's 7 here. There's actually a new one, the West TMA, that's not listed on this site here. But we're all kind of on a mission to reduce congestion, improve air quality through kind of this partnership with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, which is Dr. Cog. And so we're out there really working with organizations, employers to really bring kind of programs to their employees, whether it be carpooling, biking programs, RTD pass programs. And so I kind of wanted to give just like a little snapshot that TMAs are kind of here, kind of doing the work of trying to get people to not drive everywhere. Have a nice website called waytogo.org. through DRCOG that people can go and kind of get a lot of resources from and information from. There's things like School Pool that really work with schools to set up carpooling networks within schools for parents dropping off kids and picking up kids from school. So kind of wanted to just mention these programs. A lot of them are geared towards kind of traditional 9-to-5s. That's usually the TMA's kind of target outreach, is really working with larger employers who have a lot of employees, where we can really get in and kind of work with them to set up these programs. Like I mentioned, Bike to Work Day, carpool networks, RTD pass programs. But a lot of times it leaves a lot of people out. So a lot of times it's really geared towards 9-to-5. We've kind of worked more in Northeast Denver, where we have a lot of shift workers. We have a lot of kind of warehouse manufacturing. So we've never really fit in super nicely with a lot of the programs that are available. I think when I was kind of coming up with this conversation and talking to this group, I really wanted to make sure that people are thinking equitably around kind of access to mobility options. I think a lot of people that need the most help are usually paying the most for RTD. You know, they're paying the full fare for the bus, and they have the most limited kind of options available to them. And I wanted to try out, as I was kind of like talking about this and thinking about this, we have a really nice video, and let me know, hopefully you can hear the audio, but I'm just going to share like a minute of this video where it's our director, Angie Malpiedi, really kind of expressing that in a better manner than I think than I can. So. Can you guys not hear that? Oh no, it looks like in the chat people can't hear it. Well, anyway, I think instead of kind of going into trying to like fix my audio, I'll maybe share the link in the chat, and people can maybe watch it on their own time. But really, it's all about that. You know, if you think about your own options, a lot of times those of us who are on this call, who are kind of at the table, have options. When you think about your own life, you know, you get to choose, like, can I work from home today? Can I take this meeting, you know, at my home office? Can I take the bus? Do I have an opportunity to bike to work? Or like kind of just like picking and choosing those options. And not everybody really gets that opportunity, and making sure that when we're kind of thinking about programs and trying to bring options to different groups and different communities, that there's a big group that are transportation disadvantaged, and that we can really kind of help those people who need more access to public transit, more options of, you know, I think a lot of people would like to get an EV, but it's really out of most people's price range. And so really making sure, and I'm sorry if my presentation's a little clunky, I'm kind of going back and forth between different thoughts here, but understanding, let me highlight this, that many community members are really motivated to create actionable change around climate issues. However, a lot of people are kind of facing multiple existential threats, such as a lot of the things that Deya mentioned in her presentation about affordable housing, food security, energy access, job access, education, everything that a lot of us, I think, take for granted. And so making sure that, you know, not everybody has that luxury of prioritizing one mode over another. They're really just kind of reacting to what they have available to them at that moment. And therefore, I think our goal should always be to make the transportation solutions as easy and attainable as possible. and to make sure that we're kind of lifting those people up who could use those resources the most. Again, like I said, as part of a TMA, we are geared towards that employer outreach. One of our biggest hurdles is really the behavior change of those employees, but more often than not, it's getting into those businesses and getting into those large employers. And so the greenhouse gas kind of rulemaking effort and opportunity that we have here in front of us should really kind of push for some change where employers really have to kind of step up and give these options to their employees. And it should be equitable. It should not be passed on to the employee necessarily, and made sure that these resources are kind of attainable and employers are kind of more on the hook for giving those opportunities and those options to those employees. I think a lot of times the employers that we work with, they struggle a lot of the times with employee retention. And when we survey employees, a lot of times that always comes back to reliable transportation. I think a lot of times when we come into a place, people are kind of like thinking that we're asking them to do all or nothing, like bike every day or bus every day, or carpool every day. And while that would be really tremendous and really nice, we know that that's not realistic for most people, and people have lives, and sometimes you need to drive. What our ask is usually is just try it out one day a week if you can, change up your commute, get out of your car. And that way you have the options, you have the knowledge. So then when you do need it, when the car is broken down or a family member needs that car, if you're a one car household, you have those options in your back pocket to really be able to be successful and have access to those jobs and those opportunities that you need to. I think, I apologize again for my video not working. I will definitely put it in the chat here in a little bit. One of the things I wanted to mention was that in rulemaking like this, a lot, and the TMA is kind of doing this work, we need more organizations doing this work across the state. And so if you're part of an organization, or if you're have the means to get involved that way in your community, try to like look for funding and opportunities. It looks like through these greenhouse gas rulemaking and transportation bills, there is a lot of funding, and we need more people kind of doing this work. A lot of it is just educating and doing the outreach to employers and to employees. And to also think outside of the box when you're kind of going to different places. And so I think we often think that, you know, there's only these few sets of options when we talk about mobility. So like carpooling, biking, teleworking, public transit, even those like first last mile connectors, the shuttles, but really think about local hire programs, commuter incentive programs. So we've often found that if we can add an incentive to get people to try a different mode, we're so much more successful in getting more people to try that mode and change their behavior and create that habit. And that's what we really want, is to create that habit to get out of your car and try those other modes. So those commuter incentive programs are really key. If you can get funding to add incentive programs, which a lot of times it's very limited. So opening up funding for more incentive programs is really key. We have a few bike libraries. So we have 3 bike libraries in the communities of Bloatville, Elyria, Swansea. We're in the process of changing those over to e-bikes this summer. So we're really excited. We've been working with the City of Denver's climate office to get e-bikes. We're opening one up at the Tiny Home Village to kind of test out and as a pilot for the Tiny Home Village to then hopefully provide e-bikes to more people through their programming. Think about business shuttles, community shuttles. We have smart bike locker programs to try to incentivize people to have, secure storage when they're going out and when they're choosing like a car or a bike. A lot of times they want a secure place to park their bike. And then EV access, I think, gets thrown around a lot, but I think there should be more used EV programs. I personally drive a really old, like 2012 Nissan Leaf, and it was really cheap and it works great for my commute. I can't go too far. I can't go like out of the city really with it, but just for my commute, it works really well. And I've saved way more money, lower maintenance. So I think there should be more used EV programs. I think there's a lot of people who would be open to getting an EV if they knew the cost of some of these used EVs, and if there was programs to help them get into used EVs. I think that could go a long ways for a lot of people. And then again, just through this greenhouse gas kind of rulemaking opportunity, just getting more organizations involved and more of your community involved, and know that your community is the experts on their transportation. So really making sure that you're listening to the community members. You're not coming in with an agenda of like, you want to bring in bike lanes, but really listen to them and know kind of what their needs are, what their barriers are, and what their concerns are. And I think as a whole, as a state, the region, we can be more successful and have much more equitable programs and solutions that we can bring to the communities that we all live in. So thanks for bearing with me. I know, again, I apologize for the video not working and kind of going back and forth between websites here, but thanks so much for having me and allowing me to kind of talk about the TMAs and our work as a whole. And then I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to Jamie Valdez from a Pueblo perspective. And I'll hand it over to Jamie. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But just bear with me for a moment. Okay, can everyone see that? Oh, yes, you can't answer very well. As has been mentioned, my name is Jamie Valdez. I live in Pueblo, Colorado, and I am a community organizer for Mothers Out Front, an organization that works toward the goal of a livable climate for all children. I also serve as a volunteer leader in the Colorado Sierra Club. And I'm a parent and grandparent with kids and grandkids growing up here in Pueblo. And I'm concerned for their future because of the climate crisis. I'm also an avid mountain biker, but oftentimes riding around town is the easiest way to get a quick workout, especially when I don't have time to get out to the trails or whatever. It's just easiest to sometimes get those base miles by riding through town. Plus, it's a fun way to cruise. It's fun to kind of cruise around and enjoy the community. We have our amazing river walk here in Pueblo, as well as just an outstanding river trail system that runs along the Arkansas River and Fountain Creek. When I'm out riding, I definitely notice the pollution from vehicles, especially big trucks and buses. Pueblo is a low-income community with a median household income roughly 17,000 below the national median household income and 26,000 below that of the state. So many of our residents are not likely to be able to afford electric vehicles for several years, if even that soon. For this reason, among others, our community would benefit most from electrifying our public transportation system and kind of putting a lot of our focus there, at least for the near term. In Pueblo and across Colorado, communities lack access to non-polluting, reliable, and affordable transportation options, impacting their access to healthcare, education, recreation, work, and food. Our local public transit system is badly in need of updates to keep up with changing times and the needs of our community. Pueblo should begin transitioning our existing public bus fleet to smaller, zero-emission electric buses. Pueblo currently has multiple neighborhoods experiencing food desert conditions, meaning residents have no access to fresh produce and healthy foods within 5 miles. And at least 25% of the city's population lives at or below the national poverty level. One of the disadvantages facing low-income people living in these neighborhoods is access to reliable, or lack of access, I should say, to reliable transportation so they can get to a grocery store. Public transit can provide a vital service to people in these situations, but in this day and age, there is no reason we should have to trade air quality or our health for access to the goods and services we all need. We need our legislators to prioritize funding for updated, non-polluting public transit options. For too long, local, state, and federal transportation policies have been inequitable, leaving low-income communities and communities of color with inadequate access to public transportation, divided by highways, and breathing toxic air spewed by the vehicles traveling on our congested roadways. So the vision is transforming from Pueblo's existing public bus fleet, which looks something like this. This is one of the buses that we currently have, the large diesel buses running in our city. So here's my vision for the future of transportation in Pueblo. Here, like I said, here we see one of Pueblo's large diesel buses, which often run half empty because there's either not enough demand, or the people most served by these buses don't have any place nearby where they can access the bus system, or other factors for that matter. But in this next picture, we see what the future could look like. Electric buses, many of which can be charged right at the bus stops as they're reloading. Reimagining our transportation systems will result in cleaner air and improved health and well-being for Pueblo area residents and all Coloradans. Once again, Puebloans would benefit from more accessible public transportation or public transit options for both large and small electric buses, depending on public use and number of routes. So as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes we see our buses driving around town half empty. And so for that reason, I think that we should add a mixture of the larger buses like you see here on in the picture on the left, and also the smaller shuttle type buses that you see on the right in plain white. This way we could add more routes, and that way we would serve more Puebloans and not have so many unnecessary transfers and long delayed routes. As someone who often enjoys bicycling, usually multiple times per week, I also hope to see Pueblo become a more bicycle-friendly city. It's not only a clean way to get around, it's also such a fun way and a great way to meet new people in our communities. Plus, it really helps keep you fit. With that in mind, Pueblo County, in partnership with the City of Pueblo, Pueblo West Municipal or Metropolitan District, active community members, and local nonprofit organizations recently implemented Pueblo's first ever e-cycle to own program in parallel with the Colorado Energy Office's 2021 e-bike pilot program. Through the low-income essential worker, or through the program, e-bikes or electric bicycles will be handed off at no cost to low-income essential workers in our community. The program enables healthier worker lifestyles with a more flexible form of transportation, especially to those who do not have access to a car for transportation to and from work. This is one step in the right direction. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Jenny to close us out for the evening.
Thank you so much. Those were all some amazing presentations. So I'm actually not going to close this out for the evening. That honor belongs to Alexis. But I did want to remind everyone before we move into the Q&A that we are still doing the jam boards. And you guys have put so many good suggestions here. I want to let you know we have a couple more slides. Same question: what transportation projects do you want to see in your community? So if any of those presenters have given you any ideas, or if anything comes to you over the next half hour, please feel free to keep going in there and keep adding your ideas. And I will be turning it over back to Duncan, I think. Oh, and I'll put the link to the jam boards in the chat again.
Awesome, thanks, Jenny. So now, folks, we're just going to walk through the sort of call to action piece of this workshop tonight. So you've heard from some of our fantastic speakers, and now I'd just like to walk through a document that we've created for you, members of the public, to stay informed on how you can make your voice heard within this rulemaking. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and walk through this document with you all. And then after I show you all this call to action document, I will post it in the chat so y'all can have access to it. So here we go. Okay, so we've created this transportation rulemaking advocacy actions. And what we're envisioning here is that over the duration of the rulemaking, this will be a sort of one-stop shop for folks to come to figure out how they can participate in this greenhouse gas pollution standard rulemaking to influence it in favor of all of the outcomes that our speakers presented about. So we're going to update this document weekly throughout the duration of the rulemaking, and it will reflect kind of what we're hoping folks will do. So for example, the sort of action number one is Sierra Club has developed an awesome petition that you can sign. So that's like kind of quick, easy. Action two, submit written and oral comment to the Transportation Commission. So there's a couple ways to do that. The first way is to submit a 2 to 3 sentence written comment through the Transportation Commission portal on their website. And we have some talking points that will help you kind of formulate some ideas or give you some, just give you some ideas that you can craft into your own unique message. And then coming up on August 19th, the Transportation Commission is having a workshop. We have linked to the agenda in this document. There is more information on this coming. We don't yet quite have all of the information on it, but again, we will be updating this document as time moves forward. So, and then lastly, the Department of Transportation is going to be conducting 5 public hearings around the state at 5 different dates between August 13th and October 12th. The dates and the locations are also to be determined, so we will be sharing that information with you all as we get it. But that is another way to have your voice heard within this rulemaking, is to show up to one of these 5 public hearings. Moving down to action 3, 4, and 5, if you feel so inclined, writing letters to the editor, getting some, building some awareness amongst the general public about this rulemaking and the opportunities to transform Colorado's transportation system is a really worthwhile use of your time. Action number 4, sign up to participate as a stakeholder in the rulemaking. So you can actually just pretty much very easily send one email and become a stakeholder to the rulemaking, which essentially just means you're signing up to receive email updates and receive information about how and when to make public comments. So it's a very informal commitment, but it will help you stay informed. And then the action number 5 is just after August 13th, and August 13th, we will have some draft language for the greenhouse gas pollution standard rule, at which point we will update this document with new talking points. But after August 13th, feel free to actually email the transportation commissioners and get in contact with them directly to let them know what your vision is for the future of Colorado's transportation system. And then there's a couple bonus actions that you can look through. So that is the call to action. And again, we will be updating this regularly. But there is about 46 folks on this call. So if every single one of us took the first action, for example, that's 46 kind of messages being sent. Then if we, all 46 of us take the next several set of actions, that's very quickly hundreds of sort of advocacy actions that really will make a difference within this rulemaking. So I'm going to go ahead and share this document with everybody. And then I will pass it off to Alexis from the Sierra Club, and she will walk us through a Q&A. So you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So, all right, I'm posting this document in the chat now. There we go. Thanks so much. Alexis, floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Duncan, for sharing those actions with us. And wanted to kick it off the Q&A session now. And we can start with, I see that John had a question in the chat box. And he says, I don't believe decision makers will take enough drastic action quickly enough. What is it going to take to make these things happen fast? Oh man, that's a good question. It's definitely what we want. I can begin with that, but some of our coalition's requests to CDOT were to have a timely rulemaking. And there was some delays initially, but I believe that it's on an expedited schedule now. And maybe if some of our other speakers or hosts could chime in.
Yeah, I think in speed is always hard when we're dealing with some of these big government policies. I think one of the things that's so important about the next year or two is that we're talking about how we're going to spend billions of dollars in transportation money, and what we spend it on will determine what we have for the next 50 years. So there are some huge, so even though, we're making decisions that will have impacts for years and years and years and years. So I think that's particularly important, and something that can't be overlooked is, the amount of money we're spending now is really going to determine how we travel in the next, decade or two. I don't think you've introduced yourself, Matt. You have appeared, and I'll say for those folks who saw my slides, a lot of those came from Matt Fromer from Sweep, and so he might also have something to say.
Yeah, I thank you, Danny. I would just add that in the past, Colorado has really struggled on transportation funding. Right before this year, we hadn't raised the gas tax since 1991. It was declining in purchasing power. And so we're kind of losing money every year to spend on new capital projects. I think this year, obviously a big change with the legislation to raise more money for transportation. And then now we also have a bipartisan infrastructure package that may pass at the federal level that would effectively double the state transportation budget. So a lot more money to spend on our system, and we can either do it in a way that sort of exacerbates our current problems with pollution and congestion and safety and access, or we could transform the system because we have the money to do it now and in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think it's a big opportunity that we didn't have in the past.
All right, thanks, Matt and Danny. And John did that answer your question? Okay, well, if you need more elaboration, we can always come back. Let's see. Next question is by Stephen Smithers. How do we get the development community to the table in a constructive fashion? They are key players who play huge roles in local land use. And yes, thank you for raising that, because these transportation issues are also housing and land use development and use issues. These are also health issues. There's a lot of issues all combined at an intersection. And so if any of our panelists would want to speak to this question about how we get development community to the table.
I am happy to take a go, and then Danny and my other panelists, I would encourage you all to jump in as well. I mean, I think, Stephen, that's the multi-million-dollar question, even for affordable housing developers. I think conversations like this are part of at least getting the affordable housing folks to the table. And I think for us, as Mile High Connects, we're really focused on getting kind of those friendly developers, those that we know are champions and see kind of the cross-sectional nature of this work, and having them serve as those champions among their peers. It's sometimes a little peer pressure helps, but I think what you're raising is honestly a question that we have struggled with, even outside of the affordable housing space. Like, how do we get other developers to the table? That's just a question that we have. The other thing, and this is something that I have been wondering about a little bit more in recent years, is, yes, we need to get developers to the table, but also what's the role of the Mpos, so the metropolitan planning organizations, or council of governments, and really having them take a more solid stand on land use, and how can they leverage their role? Typically, most of them focus on transportation, but how can we bring them to the table as a willing partner in this conversation to really push developers and push those in the economic development communities to start thinking about it a little differently? I'll stop there and just see if Danny or Matt want to add anything else.
Just to tie it directly to the rulemaking, as I said in my presentation, the rulemaking is about the rules. So in the next 3 months, we will determine rules and metrics. And one of the things that could happen, just like I gave the basketball example, I mean, as soon as three-pointers became a thing, players started shooting three-pointers because you're going to get more points if you're making it from behind the farther away line. So it's a similar thing. If we can make it so that there is an acknowledgement that money spent on our transportation system in areas where people can walk and bike to complete trips, and we don't have to have people driving as much. If those sort of things can be recognized and rewarded coming out of these rules, then all of a sudden cities will want to start competing to make sure their projects have those aspects of it, that they grow in those particular ways, because that's how you're going to pull down the dollars or maximize your dollars and maximize your investments. And so I think that's how this rulemaking can be really important. And then, of course, step 2 is then implementing it. But one way to get the developers to the table is get the cities and counties to realize we're going to get more money, more investments if we grow in a certain way, and they'll then pass that price signal on to developers as well. That's the hope. That's an opportunity that we have. And if you're in this space or you have something to say about that, you should raise your voice up, because it's not something that I think CDOT hears all the time. And so that would be a really good comment, really good to zero in if this is something you care about.
All right. Thank you, Dana and Danny. Let's see. I'm checking the Q&A box. All right, and then I see that Eric, you've shared some information about Denver having a new transportation demand management regulation for developers. And I don't know if you wanted to expand more on that. Thank you for sharing the link.
Yeah, no, I think it was also in response to that previous question about how to get developers to the table a little more. So as of June 1st, the city of Denver passed this regulation for developers, but it's only for new development, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And it's for TDM solutions to be integrated into their project in the site design early on. And they can't get approval on their site until they have these TDM solutions and a plan kind of brought to that site design and that development. And so it's kind of exciting to see that step. And I think more cities need to follow suit. And then we need to start doing not just new developments, but anyone who's retrofitting or start doing existing developments of a certain size to be implemented. But yeah, it's a promising step in the right direction, I think.
All right, thank you, Eric, for elaborating on some of those incentives or those regulations. Let's see, we have a question in the Q&A box from Lisa. What about rural areas and the Western Slope? For most people, the only option is to drive a car to go anywhere, work, stores, etc. Only public transportation is the school bus, and lots of families don't even use that, often because it's an hour-plus ride. Some people can walk if they live in town, so incentive to do that and biking would be good. So, right.
I can talk about that. I mean, I think this rulemaking starts with CDOT and it then goes down to the planning region. So it will impact the Denver metro region, but it's a statewide rule. So CDOT has a lot of impact on, for many areas outside of the Denver metro urban area, your main street is a state highway. It runs right through town. I mean, for any of us who, so CDOT is the primary, plays a huge role in terms of transportation planning and in terms of transportation implementation. And so if this rule can be steering CDOT to, for example, look, the more that those main streets are considered places where people congregate and people shop and live their lives, the more that the street will be designed in a different way to reduce speeds, to provide more access for people to complete their lives without being worried that they're going to get hit by a car. So this rule is all about statewide, and the solutions in some parts of the state are not the solutions in the other parts of the state. So in rural areas, one thing I don't think we talk enough about is Colorado actually has some really good examples of some rural transit options, more in the recreation areas, the communities, but still there are examples of rural transit that we could build off of. And it might not be a bus that can carry 30 people that runs every 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Maybe that's not the model, but it's a van that's just a call and ride, something you can call and get a ride to wherever you need to go. And it might be a 30-mile trip or a 100-mile trip, but it's going to look different, but the basic principle is still the same. When CDOT's thinking about what to do in a rural area, the bus that takes people 30 miles or the van that takes people 30 miles needs to be properly rewarded or awarded so that it's taking into account the pollution and the other impacts that other transportation decisions might have. So this is definitely a statewide rule, and we definitely need people in rural areas to speak up and say, transit isn't just for Colfax Avenue in Denver. This is something we need everywhere. Walking is not just for, Union Station in Denver. This is something that people do everywhere.
I would just add one thing that Danny Katz actually told me last year, which is that if you look at the geography of the Western Slope and how you solve transportation with public transit, it's actually much easier because everything is kind of fit into narrow valleys, like along these corridors. And you compare that to like the sprawl we have in the Front Range. Like, how do you solve that? Really, it takes like a full grid of buses that sort of loop around in a circuitous way. So in some ways, the mountain towns some of them anyway, are set up geographically for transit, and they're set up for success. They're also free in some towns.
All right, thank you, Matt and Danny. And so somewhat relatedly, we have a Another question about communities outside of Denver. This is from Velma, directed to Jamie or others. How can communities outside of the Denver area or disproportionately impacted communities anywhere, and also rural areas, make our transportation needs more of a priority in the climate conversations?
So I typed an answer in the Q&A box, but I'll go ahead and read that so anyone who's not able to access that box can hear my answer. First of all, thanks for a good question, Velma. I think a good start is getting Pueblo or Southern Colorado or Western Slope folks on some of our state regulatory boards where they can advocate for us. As I think you know, Terry Hart, who is a former Pueblo County Commissioner, has just recently been appointed to the Colorado Transportation Commission, and he's long been a champion for Pueblo, both for our people and our environment. And so I think that's a good start, and we need to continue with more of that. That would be one way.
I would just say this rule is a phenomenal way too, because it literally is a rule about connecting transportation to greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think one thing you could demand is hearings down in Pueblo or any of your communities. I know that there are efforts to get feedback and voices from outside of the Denver metro area. So now is a good time. That could be one of the things you submit feedback on early in the process, is how to engage with you and your community, because that is part of our goal. We want to make sure that this process not only comes up with a rule, but actually engages more people more equitably. And so that's something you should be providing feedback on too, not just the merits of a rule and the points for transit and all that. It's literally how should they be contacting you and in your community? Are there events that they should be going to? Is there a public hearing they should be holding? How should they do it? What language should they do it in? What time should they do it? That sort of feedback should be passed along early in the process too, because I think there is an openness to try some things differently. And if you give them some concrete ideas, I think they'll listen.
Great, thanks Jamie and Danny for your answer. Let's see. Next question is from Jeff. Could we have some examples of rules we want passed? Oh, okay, this is good. Let's see, what do our panelists say?
Well, let's hear, Matt, why don't you and I riff on this a little bit? So, I mean, in its simplest form, it would be, if you propose something that increases pollution, then it shouldn't move forward. I mean, it shouldn't be a transportation project that we move forward. And if you propose something that's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and even better, if you're going to propose something that reduces overall greenhouse gas emissions, but actually reduces other co-pollutants and other pollutants in particular areas that are more polluted than others, those projects should be front of the line, first off the shelf, get funding now. So those are, I mean, that's kind of the most, I think my simplistic way of describing that is like one example. And then there are some things around modeling and accuracy that we care about. And then there are some things around process and equity. So like, will projects and plans, what sort of outreach will they have moving forward outside of this rulemaking? What sort of things are we going to just do? So those are some like very simplistic examples, but do others want to dive in and make it more specific?
Yeah, I think to expand upon the process, we're really looking at ways that we can have the state not just be doing community engagement, but getting representatives from these disproportionately impacted communities into places where they have decision-making power in the transportation planning. And that applies to how the state does this rulemaking. And then it also applies to what the rulemaking says about how transportation planning has to be done moving forward.
Yeah, I would just echo Jenny, what you offered. I mean, I think for us, we're really focused on how does this ultimately change the practice and the way that CDOT operates. So everything from equity and just community engagement, but beyond community engagement, true community participation and partnership, and ensuring that represented folks, communities that have been disproportionately impacted and have felt the negative consequences are the first to receive the benefits of anything that comes from the rulemaking. Because it's one thing to just put something out there, but if they're not going to receive the benefit for another 5 years, meanwhile, the disparities just get wider and wider. It's like we didn't do anything. And so that's certainly something that I am looking for from this process.
I forgot to mention the one other critical thing, which is, will there be consequences if you don't hit the goals? So that's probably the last critically big thing is we can set goals and say, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by X amount. Projects need to adhere by this. But what happens if a project comes forward and doesn't, or, you know, there's in the future, you know, project is built, but it turns out it created a ton of pollution. That's a big question. And how do we include something in the rule around what I would call enforcement?
I would just add, I mean, just to emphasize that this is a big opportunity to tackle land use and how it ties in with transportation and housing. You know, like you know, it's really hard. Growth is a challenging topic politically, but it's happening in Colorado. We've got, you know, 5.5 million people. We're going to add another 750,000 in just the next 9 years. So figuring out like where those people can live in a way that's affordable and efficient and a way that cleans up our system is really challenging. And I just don't think we're set up for success at the local level to solve those challenges, because we're only hearing voices of people who already own in those communities, right? And so I think this is our chance to take a step back, look at the bigger picture, and work at maybe the regional and the state level toward a cleaner system. And it's certainly the best chance I've seen so far to tackle it.
All right. Well, I believe this brings us to the end of our webinar. And so I want to thank our dynamic group of speakers for their presentations. And thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate you joining us this evening. There is a follow-up will be to the document of action items. And also as a heads up, our coalition intends on doing another webinar just when we're a little bit more into the rulemaking process at that point. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you all for coming. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Danny as a follow-up. And maybe Danny, if you wouldn't mind sharing your email address. So yeah, appreciate you all. And we'll look forward to being in touch. And thank you so much.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
just us now.
Great job, everyone.
That's really good.
Yeah, heck yeah.
All right.
Yeah, how do y'all think it went?
I think it went great.
I'm gonna put it on YouTube.
Let's go. Jenny, your Jamboard exercise was awesome.
Oh, I know. I'm so excited to come back for it. We're still getting them.
Oh, cool.
There's still like 20 people on the Jamboard.
Yeah, so many,
Like
so
most
many
of boomers,
pens,
just like,
pens
what
on
is
the
this
screen.
what is this witchcraft?
All right. Yes, folks seem really engaged. So
Yeah, and great job moderating the Q&A, Alexis. That was, it's funny, kind of tricky to orchestrate all the different stuff coming in, but you did so good.
thanks.
Thanks,
All right.
Alexis, for inviting me, and thanks everyone. It was it was an honor to be on the panel with all of you.
Thanks so much for speaking,
Yeah.
Jamie. I really
Yeah, great
appreciate
job.
it.
Likewise.
And
Yeah,
of course,
and-
Matt, go for it.
I was gonna say Terry Hart is really awesome. I just watched him speak in his first meeting on the CDOT Transportation Commission, and he's definitely a champion for us. So I'm glad to have him on there.
Absolutely. He's a good friend, and I look to him a lot for advice. So thanks. Glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, Misha, thank you so much for your tech support.
Happy to help.
Cool.
All right, everyone. Well, this has been great. So yeah, thanks again, Jamie, for speaking, and thanks, Duncan, for spearheading, organizing this event. So really appreciate you bringing everyone together.
Of course, more to come.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one, folks.
All right.
Have a
Have a
good
great
night.
night.